it? Great. Okay. Well, thank you again so much for joining. Your name is going to be no surprise, and if people don't know you, they will get to know you after today. This is, of course, Susan Chang. I am such a big fan of your books. I'm a big fan of your work, and it's really wonderful to have you here and to talk about, dive deeper, I would say, into tarot, and especially what tarot is today. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here.
So to dive in, I wanted to dive immediately into the tarot sphere. And the first question that I want to ask is this proliferation of, I mean, we have so many tarot decks. We have tarot decks on unicorns, you name it. I even found there's a pug tarot. Whatever your subject matter is, you can find a tarot deck on it. What are your thoughts on this proliferation of imageries that we have today, and whether that's actually doing a disservice to us and pulls us further away from the fundamentals that are so essential to tarot's function?
Yeah. In general, my belief about tarot is that it contains everything, right? And I don't really see it as a problem, actually, because I believe that, you know, um, what we see when we see the original images from the Tarot de Marseille, the early images from the Tarot de Marseille, or the early uh, Northern Italian decks is just really a starting point, and even the Rider-Waite-Smith deck only shows a fraction of what every card entails. So, I think that each card is kind of, archetypally what Jung would have called a diffuse cloud of cognition, right? And it can contain vast expanses of meaning. So, if somebody wants to add the unicorns and pirates to it, I think that's great, right? I think that's wonderful if that's their way in. And I think the mistake we make is only if we think that, any card is like one only thing that the creator may have assigned to it, or the little white book assigns to it. I think that, they are, I think, I don't remember if it's Sally Nichols or Jung himself who said that they were projection holders, right? So whatever we place into them, they have the capacity to contain. So generally, I think it's good. The one thing I resist is, if we were using a particular deck and someone tells you can only use these particular meanings because they go with this particular deck. I don't think that's a human way of approaching things, Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds very rigid. When going back to the archetype, and there are definitely collective representation of archetypes, and we can see them in the majors. And there's no denying that a fool is a collective archetype, magician is collective archetype, and so on and so forth. So what do you think? Do you think it's problematic when an artist of a deck does a complete 360 rendition of that archetype, where you're looking at it and you're looking at, let's say, an empress, and it feels art-wise that nowhere is this near representation. What happened? I mean, Mary White's Mary Altero, the Hierophant, of course, comes to mind, where she changed it since, but the initial was, in my opinion, 360 rendition.
What was in it, in the image?
It's a Hierophant that Mary White did in Mary Altero. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it was.
I know the tarot, but I can't bring the image to mind.
Yeah, it was very distinct. It was almost this hag-like Ellen-like feel creature that had these two babies stuck in on her breasts, and she's almost drying out for milk, which I symbolically get. When I think about religion and archetype, I'm like, of course. There's no more milk to suck there. But what are your thoughts when somebody does such a drastic rendition where it's really no longer an archetype? At least, I'm sorry, at least it's no longer archetype in a collective sense. It may be their subjective.
Right. Yeah, I often think of that, there's a diagram in Marie Louise von Francis, I think it's in here, in Divination and Synchronicity. I could be wrong. This is one of my favorite books, but I'm always misquoting it. Oh, no, here it is. So I'm actually going to switch cameras so you can see. Do I have the screen sharing? I don't need it actually. I can just switch cameras and it'll be fine. So here we go. So here's the diagram, and it's a little bit glary here, so you can't see. And this is a field, what Marie-Louise von France called a field of related archetypes, right? Where you can see that, the father archetype is related to the well and the great mother and the world tree and et cetera, et cetera. And, I think if we could see a physical representation of archetypal concepts related to each other, everything's related to everything else ultimately. However, there are certain conventions, there are certain, ways that we expect collective archetypes to constellate. And, and when somebody sort of drifts past what we expect, to an extent, I think that's healthy. I think it's good for us to try to expand and broaden our understanding of the archetype and see how far we can take it. But on the other hand, at some point, we kind of lose track of the thread and we can't communicate anymore. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I just think that, it makes it harder for us to speak a lingua franca of tarot, when that happens. And that's one of the reasons I don't use Marielle myself. I think it's a brilliant deck, interesting, beautiful, artistic, but I've never quite been able to make it go. So, and I think that's the risk you run as an artist when you do that, when you have a vision that's so intensely personal that that it can't be shared. And it's neither, I don't think it's a moral thing, really. I think it's just a question of, like Paul Newman said in the film, what we have here is a failure to communicate.
I love that. I also would love to see you. So if you want to switch your camera back, I'd
Oh
love
my
to see
goodness, let me do that. Yes.
Oh, that's okay. I'd love to see you. And I agree. I don't think it's a moral issue. I think it just becomes this distinction. Do you think it's important for, and we have so many people who are new to tarot, who sometimes maybe enter tarot through this indie art deck creators without really starting with fundamentals first, which is fine. It's just a different way of doing.
Different way of doing it.
Do you think it's important for people to be aware that there are, I would say, decks, either they're indie or classic decks, right away, Smith, Zoth, Marseille, that have the fundamentals embedded, and then there's some artists who continue to embed it in the backbone of their structure, and then there's some artists that are their own personal subjective rendition, and people need to be aware that when you read with them, perhaps it will be a different type of reading, because what I think about is, at what point are you as a reader now entering a subjective reality of that person, and now it's almost like collusion with their psyche.
No, I think that's a very good point. I think that, when you see a deck that is just somebody's personal subjective vision, you are, I find it a little confining. I find it a little confining. On the other hand, can you ever take the reader out of the interpretation, right? I think that my view is that if I'm using one of those decks that is, somewhat limited in scope because it's just one person's view and it doesn't have a lot of dialogue with, with the history and the background of tarot, then I feel like, well, I still have access to what I believe those meanings are, and my meanings probably comprehend those meanings as well. It's probably a subset of what I use. And perhaps the deck may put a little bit more emphasis on one aspect of the, archetypal image than I would. But, I think that may be meaningful for the reading and for the client in particular. I mean, I like to let my clients choose decks quite often. As a default, I will probably use Rider-Waite-Smith because I think it's so universal. But I often let people choose, and when they choose, I think there's some meaning to the deck that they choose. If somebody, for example, uses the Wild Unknown Tarot or something like that has a very particular imagery that some people are drawn to, there's probably a reason for that, and I will respect that choice and probably tilt the reading a little bit, towards Chris Kranz's vision of what a particular card might mean. So, I think that there's a place for it. But I think I do get a little bit itchy and claustrophobic, when a deck seems like too narrow to fit.
Yeah, I hear that completely. And that
Yeah.
kind of lands into the subject of tarot that I see in a way being divided into, and this is just generalizing, tarot for divination or predictions, and tarot
Mm,
for self-help psychology. And when I say
mm,
self-help psychology, self-growth, when you're not really doing predictive readings, but you're just kind of learning more about you in a world, or why you feel the way
yeah,
you do, or things like that.
yeah,
Do you
yeah.
think we're moving more and more toward the self-help psychology today, Estero?
I would say that that's a really interesting question that I think about a lot. I mean, I think that like ever since probably the 70s, late 60s, 70s, when tarot re-erupted into, society, I think the psychological reading has been a thing, and I think that that's something that has been with us throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. And, as far as fortune telling is concerned, though, I don't know. I'm seeing a lot more people who are willing to do it. And maybe I think that's the influence of Lenormand, because the Lenormand cards are very much more sort of in a fortune telling vein. And perhaps the resurgence in traditional astrology as well, which is much more predictively oriented. So I think that, there's always going to be people who do both. And that probably, looking back from maybe the 25th century, people will look at the 20th century and say, oh, wow, there was a lot of, reading for insight and self-actualization going on in the tarot world. But, but I don't think that I don't know that it's on the, hmm. I think here's the thing. I think that, as many people have observed in occult circles, the psychologization of tarot is a reaction to not wanting um, to be unscientific, right? It's like
Mm,
if we can call this a psychological, if we can get away from like the magical, the non-rational, then maybe we can have a place for this thing
yeah.
in modern society. But honestly, I mean, I think I'm obviously very much on the side of, being able and willing to do prediction if the need arises. And that's what I teach all my students, do prediction if you feel comfortable with it, read for insight if you feel comfortable with it, but, don't tell anybody they can't do either, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting you said psychologizing tarot, which is sort of what I'm also alluding to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think it's interesting because in doing so, we're actually, I don't think we're making it more scientific, we make it more even now intersubjective, right? And we're making that
Mm,
more,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
to me, it's, I don't even see psychology really as science, even though I'm a psychologist.
yeah,
It's so, yeah. Um,
yeah, yeah.
and would you agree that for that reason, if someone were to use tarot for primarily self-growth
Mm-hmm.
psychology, to psychologize about themselves, shadow work, so on and so forth,
Yeah, yeah.
do you think in that way, the more artistic, more imagery rich, saturated decks are better than perhaps Rider-Waite Smith or Stoss, where it lends
Mm.
less, I would say it lends a little bit less to psychic projection versus,
Mm.
when you have like
Yeah, I see
very,
what you mean. Yeah, no, I think I can see that there's an argument for that. I mean, a lot of the question, is it comes down to whether the card is, window or mirror, right? The ultimate question with tarot, is it a window or mirror? I mean, if you only get to work with what's on the surface of the card, then absolutely, you want to use something that fires up your imagination. If you're looking through the card at,
yes.
the world beyond it, that it's simply a filter and a frame for, then the sky's the limit, and it doesn't really matter what deck you use,
I love that. That's beautiful. The
right?
whether the card is is a window in or whether it is a mirror. And as a
Yeah.
projective tool, it's definitely is a mirror because you're looking and you're projecting yourself.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
it's really fascinating because then I always think about it because then you collude with also projections of the artist and how does that affect you because you're sitting in this container and
Yes.
energies and how do you separate what's yours and what's it's yeah.
It's fascinating. It was fascinating. I was just listening to the podcast the other day about, oh gosh, what is it called that there's a stage effect. Pepper's Ghost, it's called. There's a stage effect where, that uses the reflection of the window to onto glass to project an image onto stage, making it look like there's a ghost on stage. And I sort of think of that sometimes when you're, working with a deck that it has a very strong artist vision with it, and it's sort of like you're
Yeah,
superimposing their filter over yours, and seeing both at the same time.
exactly. It's very fascinating, and I really wish readers were pondering those things more because I think then uh, perhaps maybe what they're doing will become more clear.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of projections,
Mm-hmm.
you read professionally for people, and I would venture to say you probably read for yourself as well.
Yes,
Um,
a little bit. Yeah.
when you
Yeah.
read for yourself, how do you tend to separate your projections? How do you spot at what point it's a projection and no longer a really
Yeah.
objective fundamental meaning of the
That is really, is there such a thing as objective fundamental reading? I'm not sure. I mean, I think that, I think that the subjective is essential in tarot, right? It is, there's no meaning without us. So, so first of all, for me, for private practice, mostly I'm drawing every day, but it's a card of the day practice. So, which I consider not a prediction and not exactly for self-help, but a an invitation to create meaning, co-create meaning with the cards. So, so I'm looking for ways to make art with it essentially. So I create a spell with it. I kind of look at what my day is going to contain and reconcile that in some way with the art in the cards. So that's one thing. But when I'm reading for other people, this question of projection really does come up a lot. And there's a couple of different answers that I have to that. One of them is simply that I can tell personally when I'm getting more into a projection area or a mindset because it's different in my body, right? It just feels
Mm.
different,
Mhm.
right? I mean, for me, it's to read for someone else is like opening the tap. It's sort of like I can feel it's a physical feeling of my in my body where everything is sort of just flowing through me as opposed to me kind of stopping and scrutinizing and damming things up with my mind. And I can tell when I'm starting to project because I breathe differently. I hold my breath a lot. You know, and I start to feel like I'm floating a little bit, like I'm disconnected in some way, like
Mm. Mm.
I'm running on batteries instead of plugged into the AC outlet. It's just a
Interesting.
different feeling for me. So I literally at that point will just say, look, I'm saying this as a human being, not as a tarot reader. This is, my feelings, T. Susan Chang's feelings about this thing. And then hopefully I can get myself back into the flow and just give them a proper reading. Um, the other thing is that like if I also notice that when I'm trying to talk when I'm getting into projection with someone, I notice that I think a lot more. I'm thinking about my own experiences. I'm thinking about how they made me feel. I may even be talking about it, although the more conscious they become, the less um, I think the less hold they have on the reading. So I think it's really important to be aware, you know, and for that reason, I find it particularly difficult to read for like my husband or for my
Mhm.
family because there's so many other agendas going on at the same time. It's very hard for me to be a clear channel for them. So yeah. So generally, I think other people may have other ways to know what is intuition versus what is projection. Um,
Mm.
I think that, when reading for people, we talk about how each card has this sort of vast sort of cloud of meanings around it. To me, there's a sort of a navigational feel about that. It's sort of like I'm feeling my way towards the right meaning. And, just having other cards around and knowing the context of the question really seems to help. So, and I will often give people, if a card has maybe 16, 20 different meanings that I know of, I will give them maybe two or three, as opposed to just one and saying, this is what it has to be. And I'll say, look, what resonates with you? You're the expert on your own life, you know?
Yeah, for me, it's the same way. The projection feels, it starts to feel personal. And I start
Yeah, it starts to
seeing
feel personal.
things in the card, especially things I want to see in regard to creation. That's how,
Right. Yes, I don't know if you
right?
experience this as well, but I often find it's very hard to read for even strangers that I immediately like a lot. It's like I really want the best for them. And I'm like, turn down the volume knob on that because that is not what you're here to do. You're not here to be just their friend. You're here to help, right?
Yeah, and I personally have a very difficult time to read for myself toward big things I need to clarity on, because
Yeah.
it's this, and I read with those that primarily, it will
Mhm.
always reflect to me what I'm feeling at a moment and not the answer. So any anxiety will be right there on the table, any fears will be right there on the table, and it's just
Yeah.
basically telling me you should not be reading this for yourself. You,
It's really hard, isn't it? It's really hard. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it really
One
is.
of my students taught me a trick which I use all the time now, which is if I have something big I want to read for myself, I will actually voice record it and I will address myself in the second person. So I say, it looks
Ooh,
as though you blah 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 blah, to create a separation between the reader and the client
oh,
that
this
way. And
is
then I won't even listen to it till the next day because, I'm too invested.
Oh, that's a brilliant idea, to read for yourself as if you're reading for somebody else.
Right.
Oh, that's a
Right.
brilliant. I'm
Plus,
definitely
you're much nicer, because we're all nicer to other people than we are to ourselves.
true. Very, very true. Do you believe in unconscious?
Yeah, sure, sure.
To what extent do you think the unconscious comes into play when we use tarot?
I think it's everywhere. I think it's everywhere. I mean, I think the unconscious is in, you know, which cards we draw, what our hand does to draw the cards. I think it's there in the words that we use when we're speaking. I think it's there in the way our eye is drawn to a particular part of the
Mm.
symbol. I think it's, I mean, I think that when we sit down to do reading, I think that we are inviting the unconscious to kind of rise up and meet us,
So,
and I think it's everywhere.
so it's initially an unconscious act that then becomes conscious as we sip into interpretation.
Yes, yes. I think it's like, the analogy I've been using a lot lately is that, the chaos of the deck, the shuffling of the deck, the unconscious that we is a reflection of the unconscious, right? And that it is like when we look at the night sky and it's a field of stars, and then it's as if the constellations appear as we
Mm.
engage with it with meaning and intent. It's not like the constellations were or weren't there before, but it's like it's like the description of the Tao as the nothingness upon which something depends. You have to have that sort of that chaos, that place that is pre-verbal, in order to then project meaning onto it.
Mm. Intuition comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
How do you yourself define what intuition is?
No, I hate doing it. I hate trying to define intuition because it's one of those words that I think just they mean something different for everyone else,
Right.
for every single person. So I wouldn't want to define it for anyone else. But I
Just for
think
you.
intuition, yeah, for me, I mean, to me, intuition arises between two people, right? To me, it's not something that resides inside me, right? Just sitting around to be taken out of the closet like a wrench. It's it's something that arises between two people on the flood of meaning that's created in a reading. And it's very hard for me to dissociate intuition from empathy, because to me, you know, in the course of a reading, this is a protected space where the boundaries come down between people, and there's a, you know, to me, there's continuity between me and the other person. So I feel what they're feeling. They feel what I'm feeling, presumably. And I think that it doesn't feel, I suppose intuition is that sort of, um, one way to put it would be, it's that knowledge, that certainty that what you're saying is from their point of view as well as yours. That there's times when I've been reading for a long time and I get to the end of the day and I'm exhausted and my words are not coming anymore. And I get frustrated with the speaking part of it, because I feel like I can read their mind. They should be able to read my mind. You know, why do we need these stupid words? Right. And to me, that is like a kind of a pure form of intuition that arises out of complete exhaustion and fatigue with like the ego and getting in the way,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. When do you hear people say, I read tarot, or I learned to read tarot intuitively, and I don't know
Mm-hmm.
anything about fundamentals, right?
Mm-hmm.
Never touched a tarot book explaining fundamentals, never learned any of that. I read it intuitively, period. What does
Yeah.
that mean to you? Somebody who writes about
Yeah.
fundamentals, somebody who's reading numerous books
Yeah.
now, 4 books, I believe, on specifically on this, I would say, structures that is embedded in the tarot. What how do you interpret that when somebody says that they read tarot intuitively without learning
Yeah.
any fundamentals?
I think it's such an interesting question, really. You know, I think it's a really interesting question. So I don't think that, you know, a lot of what I've done in my work is about knowledge, is about, as you say, fundamentals is another way to put it, is about systems and about structures. And that's just my way into it, you know. Um, what I've tried to sort of work my way towards, especially in the last book, in the Living Tarot, is the idea that we, you know, the tarot is a reflection of everything. And if you can get there intuitively, if you can read everything in the cards, then it doesn't matter how you got there. If you do it intuitively, okay. You know, and I think there are people who can do that. I mean, honestly, I think many people who are actually psychic, when they're reading the cards, they don't even need the cards. The cards are just there because it's like something to do, right? But what they're reading is just because they're psychic. They can see stuff. But, you know, I think for most of us, um, the key thing is broad-mindedness, open-mindedness, being willing to see that it's not just my world that I see in the cards, but the whole world. And you know, my structures and tables and golden dawn color scales and all of that is just a way of getting there. You know, that works a lot for some of us because we tend to be more systems minded. And it also forces us to literally say every single thing needs to be in this deck. What, you know, if I need to find what the color blue means, I'm going to use this, you know, chart to do it, because this chart tells me what blue means and why it's in the High Priestess, and, you know, why it's in the Queen of Cups card, etc. But I think, you know, if someone can tell me through their intuition little things and big things and subtle things and hidden things, if they can tell me, you know, like, hmm, I'm seeing I'm seeing a bird flying through those trees, and it misses the branches and it tumbles to the ground, and then it picks itself up and it follows, you know, follows its mate into the woods. Tell me what that story looks like in tarot. If they can do that intuitively, okay, right? But if they're like, oh gosh, I don't know what card that would be, I don't know what card this would be, they may need the kind of systemic and infrastructural support that, you know, that we've been talking about in the fundamentals. That's
Mm.
the way I see it.
Yeah, and when I said that, I don't, in no way am I implying that people who read intuitively is a bad thing. I
Yeah.
think you can read tarot intuitively, fundamentally,
Yeah.
psychologically,
Yeah.
you name it. I think there's multitude of ways to read it.
Yeah.
Do you think that if we were sticking to fundamentals specifically, do you think the fundamentals become essential if you are especially reading tarot predictively, divinatorily?
Hmm. That's interesting. I don't know if I think that. I mean, I think with prediction, to me, this is just personal. To me, the most important thing that makes it easier for me to read about the future is the past. And, my experience with these cards and how they've shown up in like a million different ways. And to me, the only way for me to do that, honestly, and without sort of distortion, is to see how they show up and to be honest about what each of them means. So, um, so yeah, I mean, I think that, and also reading for other people, of course, seeing how things turn out, and then having them tell me how they showed up after I did the reading, that's helpful too. But I think that I imagine some intuitives would say the opposite, that you need to know as little as possible in order
Yeah,
to read the future, right?
yeah.
So I think it's just different. As you were saying, I think I think it's just different ways that people have of walking through the world and seeing things and picking things up. I don't, I wouldn't go so far as to say that one is more important than the other or more crucial than the other. Um, I think the only way to know is really just by doing the work and seeing how it works.
So I'm going to take it a little bit further
Hmm.
because it's so interesting to me, especially I'm a Zos reader, and Zos
Hmm.
tarot deck has so much embedded in that.
Yes,
It's
yes,
it's
absolutely.
it's a rabbit hole into a library you'll get in and you'll never get out.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah, it's true.
and I love it for that reason. At what point do you think what happens is with all this symbolism, correspondences, and everything that's embedded in a Zos and other very very esoteric and exoteric tarot decks, at what
Hmm.
point do you think we are become slaves to what I call mental masturbation of accumulating,
Yeah.
accumulating, and at what point does it start to divorce us from the
Yeah.
purity of reading the cards?
Yeah, yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, I think that Thoth in particular is tempting that way because there's so much, there's so much in it, and there's so much, so many different wormholes you can go down. I think that, I kind of make a separation between the sort of study and research of tarot and the reading of tarot, right?
Mm,
um, in terms of practice. I mean, I think that like one of the reasons I love doing card of the days is because it gives me an opportunity to, listen to podcasts and read books and like fill up on. Right now, I'm using the medieval Scapini tarot, and I'm reading Ron Decker's Art and Arcana, which goes with it, which I love. Very different way of reading tarot than what comes naturally to me, but it's a way of expanding and learning and memorizing and just pouring information in, which I often liken to, if you're a musician, practicing your scales,
mm,
and working slowly, and
mhm.
and just developing the muscle memory so that when you play, you can forget about all that, right? You have to forget about it in order to actually play.
How do you do that with tarot? How can you not pull a card and then read about the symbolism and correspondence and then an hour later do a professional reading or a reading and have the
Yeah,
same card pop up and not go,
yeah,
oh, I just read all of the... How do you not?
yeah. I think it's because when you're reading for someone, the most important thing is them. The most important thing is them and their story kind of takes on a life of its own, and the only thing that tarot is important for is how it speaks to that story. you
Mm-hmm.
know so, and I think I have a lot of faith, as as a person like you who reads and studies all the time, that whatever, all that material that's in there will come out in some form, but I don't have to try, right? It's there already. I can't take that out of it, right?
Yeah, it
It's
just now
there.
made sense because I was able to compare it to psychology. I study all the theories and orientations, but at some point in my practice, I had to
Yes,
just be like a container, a conduit, I will, if you will,
that's it. Yeah.
for this alchemical process that happens in psychotherapy, and forget everything I learned and just focus
Yes,
on what's happening. And it's this intuitive, organic process. Um,
exactly. It's like reading and writing, right? It's
yeah.
sort of like as a writer, if you're constantly trying to make it yourself sound like, like Gogol or, or like Rimbaud
Mm-hmm.
or like Henry James, it's going to be terrible, right? It's not going
Mm-hmm.
to work. You're never going to create something of your own, but you just have to trust that it's there. Even all your influences that you love, everything you've ever read, it's all there.
Yeah, which makes me think of the importance of finding yourself as a reader with the cards and
Yes.
not be like you, or be like Crowley, or be like
Yeah.
wait, be
Yeah.
like yourself.
Yeah, and that's why I always, before writing the Living Tarot, it was it is still an online course. And one of the things that over the last several years as I developed it that I really believed is that I can't teach anyone to read tarot, but I can teach you to teach yourself to read tarot. I can provide, a way of getting there for yourself.
Hmm. I think
Yeah.
that's an important distinction you made there. Thinking about Thoth and Rider-Waite-Smith, is
Hmm.
there's to me feel very distinct, and yet they're not distinct, and yet they are and they aren't. And of course, we have people who are completely Rider-Waite-Smith, completely people
Yeah.
who are, I personally don't like Rider-Waite-Smith because the artwork doesn't do anything for me. That's the only reason.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so it's
Yeah.
just really things for me. Um,
Yeah.
what are you, how would you, and it's interesting because I talked to Lone Melody Cat and I asked him,
Hmm.
how do you see the difference? And he
Hmm.
said Rider-Waite-Smith is this amazing, he said, masterpiece, divinatory masterpiece. And
Hmm.
Pamela, whatever she channeled into it, that's what was channeled in. And
Yeah.
so, as I understood the way he sees Thoth is, it's more in accordance with Golden Dawn and the initiatory path the magician takes. It's really embedded in it. In that way, it's
Interesting.
tarot.
Yeah.
It obviously can also be divinatory and a system.
Of course.
I mean, I
Yeah.
think anything can be divinatory system,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
So how do you distinguish the two?
Yeah, such a great question. I mean, I got my Thoth was my second deck after Rider Waite Smith. Literally got it the same year, like in 1995 or 1996, and I could not make it work at all. For the first 10, 15 years I had it, and it really wasn't until, I sank into dissecting it in Unfortune's Wheelhouse with Mel Meline,
Hmm.
who is a primarily Thoth
Amazing
user.
podcast.
Thank you. That I
Amazing.
realized, oh my God, I understand this. I understand what's happening in here. And and it helped me understand Rider Waite Smith better as well. So, and it's I think the two of them they really do have the same genetic material in them. And that's something that's not obvious at all until you really get to know the Golden Dawn, substructure in Book T. And they are really siblings of a kind. Some will, Rider Waite Smith reaches out to people much more easily, obviously, than Thoth does. But Thoth is, I love it for how explicit it is about the esoterics, about how you can go from place to place and truly find your way. Now, I think that because there are so many more people on Rider Waite Smith, it makes it instantly relatable for a lot of people. And I use visuals with Rider Waite Smith and decks like this a lot, in the same way a Marseille reader might use the faces and the gaze on a Tarot de
Hmm.
Marseille. So, and I think that that's a crucial technique. It's important to have it. It's important to know how to do it. But you raise another really interesting issue, which is that what if you hate the art, right? What if you hate the art on a deck? a strange thing about tarot is that sometimes a deck where you love the art will not work at all. And sometimes a deck where you hate the art works wonderfully. So we don't know why, right? We don't know why these things are. But I try to I try to give all my decks a chance for that reason, because I believe, having come around to Thoth so completely over the years, that could happen with other decks as well. And in fact, I just had another one of my zombie decks come back to life. I don't mean a deck about zombies, but a deck that I couldn't use. It was just lifeless for me. It was the Old English Tarot,
Mm.
which to me was beautiful, but didn't do anything for me. And I just brought it back into my practice like a couple months ago, and it was wonderful. It was perfectly friendly, completely able to read. So
I think that's a very interesting thing because it makes me think of um, what do you call it? Lucy Cavendish has oracles with the big idols,
oh yeah.
which I adore, but I hate using because it makes me feel like a little child. It makes me feel childish and stupid and young. And
Yeah,
I'm able to recognize it is my ego that
of
wants
course.
to
Yeah.
sit in a position of intellectual that is having a hard time with it. And I tell myself, this is precisely why you need to use this deck. So
Right.
I
Yeah.
actually would challenge and I would challenge myself. And I actually started off with Rider-Waite Smith was my first deck before I got to Sauce.
You
So I
do.
would challenge if the art brings up something, it could be that that's precisely what you need. Because if you're so enamored with art, at what point do you just no longer see things?
Absolutely. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I know it is a strange thing. It is a strange thing. I mean, I think that it's healthy to use many decks and to sort of stretch your brain and see if you can make them work, and to confront, as you said, what it's raising inside you that seems to be unrelated to what the cards are actually trying to say, because it's instructive. I mean, we learn about ourselves from from our reaction.
Yeah, you touched when you were talking about Rider-Waite Smith and so you mentioned that Thoth is so so implicit in its symbolism, in its correspondences, which it's interesting. People say it's hard to learn it, which I think it's easy to learn because it's
It's
right
easier to
there.
learn in
It's
some ways. It's
slammed
right
on
there.
cards.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's right there slamming at you. And
Yeah.
the way I see Rider-Waite Smith is a storyteller. It's really tells a story. If one were to say, and I'm not saying that I bet for some people Thoth is a storyteller, of course it is too, but
Yeah.
if I were to say that Rider-Waite Smith is a clear storyteller, like a picture book, and
Mm-hmm.
this one is more symbolic messages right there on the cards, would
Mm-hmm.
you say that those could possibly lend itself to be uh, help a reader to ground themselves in fundamentals and in structures
Mm.
versus allowing their brain to go into the story realm?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I think that um here's a story I tell in the Living Tarot book, about is it about it's about the Two of Pentacles, right? So I'm gonna switch cameras for a second here. So, I have this thing about how I really think you should be able to find the biggest things and the smallest things in tarot, right? So I sometimes challenge people to say, tying your shoes. What does that look like in tarot, right? And to me, it's this card, not just because of the way it looks, right? But because of it being Jupiter in a Saturn ruled sign. It's Jupiter in Capricorn. There's a tension and there's an expansion. It's known as the Lord of Change. That's the Hermetic title. I tie my shoes when I'm about to make a change of state, right,
Mm.
and go from inside to outside. And there's it's associated with the winter solstice, right? So there's a I'm going from inside to outside, from dark to light. There's like all these esoteric reasons I associate this with tying my shoes. However, somebody else might use this card to be tying their shoes because the person looks like they are determined to go do something. They
Mm.
literally have a shoelace untied on it. They look like a coach who was always telling you to tie your shoes. There's a number of ways to get into this. And I think that the astrology and the systems and everything are a very powerful way to do it, because it's right there. It's just
Mm-hmm.
waiting for you if you happen to be already aware of those systems and know a little bit about them and have an affinity for them. But if you don't, there are other ways as well. That's how I think about it.
I love that. And please switch the camera back.
Oh, right. Thank you.
um,
Oh, whoops. Yeah.
do you think that people who use tarot for themselves, obviously nothing wrong with it, we all do it, but at what point do you think it can lead itself to become a codependency tool where a need to know versus the inner knowing or versus sitting with the unknown?
Yeah.
And I feel like today more than
Yeah.
ever, we just struggle with sitting in the unknown. There's like this need control to
Yeah.
control the future, the understanding of the future. You think, how do you think it can lead to codependency, and how can somebody spot when they're in that position?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question. And it's so important because I think that we've all done it. I think it's really easy to kind of um, to to kind of use the oracle as a tool, a self-soothing tool, basically. you know and I think that what happens then is a shame because tarot is a meaning making tool, right? And the more that we kind of compulsively push it to act like an experiment rather than an oracle, something that's infinitely replicable and it gets more accurate the more times you do it, as opposed to an oracle, which is meaningful because you do it once, right? That is what we're looking for. And I often say that, every reading is like a sacrifice, right? And what you sacrifice, the valuable thing that you sacrifice on the altar of the oracle is your doubt. And
Mm.
so, meaning and doubt exist in an inverse relationship. And if you're constantly questioning the reading, as opposed to expecting it to be meaningful, then you are reducing the possibility of having meaning.
Ooh.
It is co-creative. You have to, you know, you when you do a reading, what makes it meaningful is you, right? So, so it's like I always tell people that don't read again and again and again. Don't read again for the same subject. Go back to the first reading, look at that card, and go deeper and deeper and deeper until you figure out what it is you're looking for. That's the way to do it. You can revisit that reading as many times as you want, but don't draw another card.
Mm. Do you think tarot in general, when I say tarot, I mean the the meaning of the reading or what it offers to us in a moment, is meant to be active versus passive?
Do you mean in the sense of is it just information or are we supposed to act on it? Advice
Exactly.
versus
Yes.
right. Yes. Um this is the crux of the thing. I mean, I believe that, when we are in a reading, because we're working with symbol, we are in a uniquely magical place to blur the line between active and passive, right?
Mm.
We are in a uniquely powerful place to say, this is the meaning that you appear to be giving me, and this is the meaning that I'm going to make from it, right? And to blend them and merge them. Every morning when I read my cards, I say, I accept and I propose. I accept and I
Ooh,
propose. I
interesting.
accept and I propose. Right. So it's a combination of going there and getting the information, but also acting on it at the same time. And to me, in the only sort of understanding of reality that makes any sense for any of this to work, the action and the receiving the information and doing the action are not two different things. They're the same. They're the same. Like the fact that that I got the Six of Pentacles, the Lord of Success, and I did a job application on purpose that day, and I got a phone call telling me that I got this next opportunity. They're all one thing, not three separate things, right?
Yes, I love that. I'm smiling because it reminds me of how I see those as such a magical deck.
Yeah,
And a lot of times, I think people neglect to see tarot just in general as this power imagery
yes,
that is magic. And if I have a day where the energy drags, I will pull Eight of Wands purposefully,
Mm-hmm.
and I will put it there, and
Yes,
for the day to go swiftly. So it's really
precisely. And I think one of the questions you had for me in your questionnaire originally was like, what is one of the things that we need more of? And we need more
and
of
less
that.
of and less of.
Yes,
Yes.
yes,
So
yes,
we need
yes.
more magic. We need more to recognize the cards for its multitude of power, multitude of usage. But what do you think we need less of?
Less fatalism, I think, probably. Less
Mm,
fatalism, less determinism, less less should also. A lot less should. One of the things I'm constantly trying to get people to do is take the should out of the
yeah,
reading in the question, right?
yeah,
And so I think that tarot is an incredibly powerful tool for living in a world of possibility, not a world that's static. And that's it's counterintuitive in some ways, because the stereotype around tarot, of course, is that oh, I don't want to know if it's already, if it's fate, I don't want to know what my fate is. And that to me is an abdication of responsibility. Because,
yes,
right, because we are fate, as I understand it, moves,
yes,
right? Fate is not static. It literally, in the models of creation that we inherit in Western esotericism, the the thing that surrounds us all is the primum mobile. It's in motion.
yes.
And fate is a way of getting to that, right? Not a way of avoiding it.
I love that. And I agree. People always ask me, and I don't read professionally, but I read for friends and family, and people always ask me, well, what exactly is this actually predictive? Is it telling the future? How do you know for sure? And I always say it doesn't matter whether we know for sure what tarot is. I love the mystery of it. I love the
Yes,
fact that it makes my life more mysterious and more interesting,
yes,
and that's all that
yes,
matters. Um,
yes. We have to give fate some breathing room
yes.
to show up.
Yes, and not suffocated with our determinism and our special sense of control.
Right, right.
Wrapping up with your books, this was interesting. None of your books mentioned this about you, but
Hmm.
one of your books, and I think it may be your recent one, if I'm
Hmm.
correct, mentions it in your biography online that, and I don't know, I don't think people even know this about you, that you occasionally write cookbook reviews for NPR,
Uh-huh.
which is I found
Yeah,
interesting. And you actually have
yeah.
a book called Spoonful of Promises, Stories and
I
Recipes from
do.
a
That's a
Well-Planned.
deep cut, Dr. Z.
Yeah,
Wow, you found it. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So you also have a book. Obviously, it tells me that you enjoy cooking, you enjoy being in a kitchen, you enjoy food and what food represents. And I think there's such parallel to cooking in a kitchen using cookbooks,
Yeah.
which what we talked
Yes.
about.
Yes.
And
Yes.
at what point do you think you realized that you no longer need a cookbook? At what point do you tell yourself, throw
I
it out of
always
the
need
window,
cookbooks.
throw it out the window, improvise, play? Because it's so
Yeah.
parallel stereo.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of parallels there. And in fact, the reason I first got into to cooking was at the same time as I got into tarot, for the same reasons, too much up in here, right? And cooking really brought me down to earth literally, and plus I
Yeah.
love food. So, so yes, I think that for me, just like I will never get away from systems and fundamentals and correspondences, I will never get away from cookbooks because I really, really love them. But
Mm,
but I also think that, for me, there is the need to surrender to it, the need to surrender to the process. And even when I still do a lot of cooking from recipes just because I have 1,000 cookbooks literally, and I hate to not use them.
it's a
So
shame.
yeah, you do.
Yeah.
So, and I do think that cooking is alchemical. I mean, it really
Mm,
is, like literally alchemical. The way you can go from here to there, you take things that, are raw materials that look like they could that look nothing like the finished product, that don't give pleasure and joy, and satisfaction in the same way the finished product does. And I do think that there's something going on when we cook that is profound and also alchemical. It's not in alchemy, it's not just the lead that turns into gold, it's the person, it's the alchemist, right? And
Yeah.
that's what's happening when we cook as well. So, I mean, I think that you can say that divination is like that as well. We start with something that has no meaning and bring it into meaning. We become the meaning ourselves. So I often talk about the idea of living the poem in tarot. The idea that we take this card and we bring it to life, not only through our actions, but in our being, who we are. And I think that cooking's you literally are what you eat, right?
Oh, for sure. I think all of those things are pure alchemy. I see psychotherapy that I do with clients is that it's alchemical container. It's kitchen literally. I don't know what ingredients the patient is going to bring on for this particular session. I don't
Yeah.
prepare, but we're going to cook something together. And by cooking and interjecting that knowledge, you change and I change. So it's
Yeah.
not the same with cooking.
Yeah.
As we cook, something inside is changing. And the same
Yeah.
thing with tarot practice. And it's this is what I love the most, that it
Yeah.
lends to this beautiful dance of the then changing within and without.
That's
Um,
beautiful.
I
That's
want to
beautiful.
finish up with your beautiful book. So I have this
Yes. Yes.
Tarot to Goddard, which you also wrote together with Emma Millen. And if people don't know Emma Millen, they really need to know both of you on your podcast.
Yes. Yes.
And uh, Emmeline, why is the name now escaping me? There's Rosetta Tarot and
Tabula
Tabula
Mundi.
Mundi, which
Yeah.
is probably one of the most beautiful renditions of those
It
that
is
I've seen.
absolutely stunning.
It's
And the
stunning.
Pharaoh's Tarot as well, which is her majors deck, which came out after that. And she's working on another one that's based on Picatrix, which is going to be very exciting. Yeah.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating. And then I also have this.
Ah, yes. 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 The 777 of tarot, of modern tarot.
Yes, this is my absolute favorite.
I'm
Um,
so glad.
I don't think that there's many, in fact, I don't know any who wrote on deacons. I think you may be the first one who put it in just specifically deacon perspective and just wrote on
For
deacons.
tarot, yes. The classic text of our time is Austin Coppock's 36 Faces, which is this is in some ways an homage to that. That is an astrological book that has a bit of tarot in it, and this is a tarot book that has a bit of astrology in it. So, but this one was very personal, and it means a great deal to me. So I'm very
Yes,
glad that it's your favorite.
it reads personally too. You give a lot of, whereas this book's right here, I would say a little bit more detached from you. This is,
Yeah,
you share a lot of your personal things and how the cards especially show up in your life, and it treats very personal. And it's amazing book. I would really highly recommend. I'll link all of the information for people
wonderful.
to grab. Can you share your new book, The Living
Yes,
Tarot?
the
What
Living
is
Tarot. Yes.
mhm,
So this book
what is
is
this?
essentially this is the book version of the course that I teach. And this one is the one that is for everyone. What I do, the previous books that you've shown, they are for you and people like you and me, people who love systems, people who love correspondences, people who know their thoughts, people who want to know how the Golden Dawn infrastructure of the decks. This one is really for everyone to get started reading tarot. It is not particularly esoteric. The source text, the source text of Golden Dawn's books, of course, Golden Dawn decks would be the Golden Dawn and Book T and 777 and Book of Thoth and Pictorial Key and all of that. The source text of the Living Tarot is you. It's your
Mm,
life. So it's intended to tie together your life on which you are the complete expert. Nobody else knows it as well as you to the cards. It's intended to weave them together bit by bit until you speak the language of your own life fluently through tarot. So it's for anybody, and I also tell people if you bought the book, just send me the receipt, and I will take the price of the book off the course. so that you can take the course online as well.
You are
And
very, very generous. That's very generous of you. One thing that I didn't get into that I also wanted to, but I also want people to know this, is that you also make perfumes, and I have three of you, and I don't know if you remember,
I do,
I
yeah.
purchased three: a Scorpio one, the Babylon,
Okay. Yes,
and
yes,
I'm trying to remember what is the other one. Yes. So, but you also,
yes,
what's
yes.
the word for a person who makes perfumes?
Perfumer.
Perfumer.
Yeah, yeah, no, I make them because, that's another thing that really came out of doing the work on tarot correspondences and Fortune's Wheelhouse, because just I discovered for myself that there was this whole world of sense that was correlated to the
Mm,
different astrological information. And I really, really wanted to know more about it, but in order to fund my hobby, I needed to make something that I can market. And it's become a really one of my favorite parts of what I do, making perfumes for people. I make them custom as well. I do,
yes,
perfumes for your sun, moon, and rising. And it's absolutely fascinating what emerges from that process.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. I'm definitely going to link all of your information and your website and where people can find your perfumes and get the customs and your books. And thank you so much for indulging me in this conversation. This has been an
Well,
absolute
thank you
pleasure.
so much for inviting me. Your questions are wonderful. You are a deep thinker, and I so respect what you do.
Thank you.